From my experience with startups in Africa or targeting Africa, the key challenges I see are around one, capital, especially early stage funding, two, talent, attracting and retaining qualified talent, and three, local regulation to structure the market and protect both investors and founders. In your opinion, how can we overcome these challenges on the continent?
I completely agree that those three are probably within the top 5 challenges that startups are facing. I think there's also maybe a false perception that if you solve for capital, you can solve for the other two, which is blatantly not true, right? I think part of how we solve for early stage capital is making sure that the local funding sources understand the potential for these technologies to impact their own businesses. At the end of the day, it's also been very difficult for a lot of angel investors to actually see their money come back, right? If you speak to most people that have written checks sub $100,000, very few of them have seen any liquidity from it, right? And I think it then becomes quite difficult to convince more people to jump in. I think capital should be solved by making technologies which are relevant to existing founders, as well as by making sure that these investors actually see the potential for these technologies, right? And it's already on its way. It's already on its way. Now thinking about talent, right? Talent is a really, really hard one to solve for. Really hard one to solve for. And it's interesting, given its connection to capital. And this is what I mean. When a lot of the startups that you've mentioned that have been able to raise a significant amount of capital actually receive that capital, one of the first things that we spend a lot of money on is talent, right? So there is a lot of pressure to very quickly bring in a very large volume and a very high caliber of talent into these companies, right? And I think it's really challenging because when you look at people from outside the continent who might have the right skill sets, who might have the right experience, who might have the right attitude, who might be able to work tremendously independently and entrepreneurially. First, of course, you have to overcome the barrier of would they want to work in Africa, right? Big barrier, right? It's slightly changing because of more stories like this getting told, so that's wonderful. But it's still a barrier to a lot of people, right? And I think secondarily, once they do want to work in Africa, the question then becomes, can they actually effectively operate on the continent? So there's this other question of then suitability and I guess adaptability to the continent, right? So I think all of that is really inhibiting a lot of flows coming through, right?
And we have as well a lot of the companies targeting the same people.
Yes.
So when you bring a qualified talent to the market, it's not only that company, it's not only attractive to that company, but it becomes that person becomes attracted to competitors as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess the question is how we retain this talent in our companies. What's your views on how we can create better or have better regulation to support all this ecosystem, all this innovation ecosystem? What can we do?
The good news is that, certainly at least in the financial services space, many of the leading central banks and regulators have begun to build stronger and stronger internal teams to be able to understand what's happening in the technology space, right? You have a very dedicated blockchain team in Kenya. The Nigerian central bank is getting more and more comfortable working through cryptocurrencies and blockchain as well. And so I think there is an increased capacity for them to be able to at least understand what's going on. Step 2 would then be, and again, many are going in a great way, consulting with sort of local players as to what regulation should look like, right? And I think you've seen a lot of really progressive regulation being put out there, right? And the question again becomes how quickly does it actually get passed? And so I think there's this increased engagement by regulators to the rest of the world as well should be able to help us see more conducive regulation come through, right?